The man who would one day be praised as Revan the Prodigal Knight and reviled as Darth Revan the Butcherer was believed to have been born in the Outer Rim world 3,994 years before the Battle of Yavin. Eventually being brought to the Jedi Temple, the young man showed massive promise, training under countless masters and soon befriending another equally promising student, Alec. The pair's lives would forever be changed in 3,964 BBY, as the Mandalorian clans led by Mandalore the Ultimate invaded Republic space, igniting the conflict that would become known as the Mandalorian Wars. Anticipating that a war with the Mandalorians would change the Jedi in ways which they could not predict, and fearing that joining the war would fundamentally change the Order, the Jedi High Council barred all Knights from participating in the conflict. Ignoring this order, Revan along with his friend Malak took up arms and joined the cause. This immediately turned the tide of the war, with Revan quickly winning a string of military victories, matching the Mandalorians' brutal tactics with tactics just as merciless, proving himself to the Republic military a capable military leader and masterful tactician. Eventually, Revan led the Republic to victory, defeating Mandalore at the Battle of Malachor V. After the defeat of the Mandalorians, Revan and Malak went into deep space, in search of a mysterious Sith influence, the true culprit behind the Mandalorians' attack. There they ran into a reviving Sith Empire on Dromund Kaas, learning of the Sith Emperor and his plans to invade the Republic. Proud and overconfident, Revan and Malak believed that they could defeat the Emperor, and rushed into the Imperial Citadel to face him. It went terribly wrong for the Jedi. Without igniting his weapon, the Sith Emperor reached out and dominated their minds, twisting the pair into willing servants, and completing their fall to the dark side. Anointing his new servants as Darth Revan and Darth Malak, the Dark Lords of the Sith, the Emperor sent them back to the Republic, ordering them to find and make use of the Starforge, a tool that would advance the creation of his armada. Revan and Malak eventually discovered the ancient weapon over the Star Abu. However, the pair broke free of the Emperor's control and decided to start their own Sith Empire, with Darth Revan taking the mantle as the Dark Lord of the Sith, and Malak as his Sith apprentice. Uniting the forces that served them during the Mandalorian Wars, and using the Starforge to fuel their war machine, Revan attacked the Republic, looking to conquer it in hopes of strengthening and further militarizing it, in preparation for the true Sith's invasion. Sparking the Jedi Civil War, Revan and Malak nearly had the Republic to its knees, before the dark side reared its ugly head. While Revan was engaged with the Jedi strike team led by Bastila Shan, Darth Malak betrayed his master, and fired on his flagship. Believing he was dead, Malak took the title of Dark Lord of the Sith, and became the sole head of the new Sith Empire. In reality, however, Revan survived. The only survivor of her strike team, Shan saved Revan's life and brought the comatose Sith Lord with her to Dantooine, where the Jedi healed Revan's broken body and wiped the Dark Lord's mind clean, erasing his memories and giving him a new identity. After escaping the destruction of Taris, Revan returned to Dantooine and was retrained in the Jedi ways, before leading the Ebon Hawk on a mission to locate the Starforge. During this mission, the group was cornered by Malak, where Revan's true identity was revealed, and Shan was captured, twisted, and turned to the dark side. Eventually discovering the Starforge once again, Revan infiltrated the Great Weapon, and after redeeming the woman he loved, confronted his oldest friend. After a vicious fight, Revan managed to wear down his former apprentice and defeat him, bringing peace to the galaxy. Despite the great victory, as the years went on, Revan would be plagued by resurfacing memories, leading him in a search for answers, and once more, into the unknown regions. Eventually making his way to the planet Nathema, Revan was captured by the Sith Lords Darth Nihilus and Scourge, who imprisoned him in Nihilus' stronghold on Dromund Kaas. Realizing there was no hope of escape, Revan accepted his seclusion, and soon befriended Scourge, with the pair eventually regarding each other less as enemies, and more as objects of interest for each other. 3 long years would pass, until Revan was rescued by the Jedi exile Meecha Surik. Along with Scourge, the pair raced off where Revan would once again challenge the Sith Emperor. Once again, Revan was defeated, as Lord Scourge betrayed them, finding himself captive once more. This time, however, he was mentally tortured for centuries by the Emperor and the fear-wielding Sith Lords known as the Dread Masters. Revan would be freed once again 300 years later, at the height of the Cold War. Believing it was his responsibility, and his alone to defeat the Emperor, Revan traveled to the Foundry, an engineering marvel that was built into a massive asteroid, capable of producing thousands of droids. Before this plan could go into effect, however, an Imperial strike team commanded by Darth Malgus ultimately drove the Prodigal Knight to defeat. Despite trying to become one with the Force, years of torture and torment fractured the man, and his spirit split, with part of him becoming one with the Force, and the rest of him embracing the darkness once again, and being left in control of his physical body. Insane and fully submerged in the dark side, this Revan took control of the Order of Revan, and waged war on both the Republic and Sith Empire alike. After agreeing on a temporary truce, the Sith and Republic chased Revan to Yavin 4, where the man was defeated once and for all. As the Dark Revan clung to life, he was visited by a spirit that had become one. Convincing his other half to release his hold on their physical form and merge once more, the Dark Revan submitted, making Revan whole once again, and finally becoming one with the Force. And finally, at peace. The story of Darth Plagueis the Wise began with the meeting of Force-sensitive banker Car Damask and renowned starship designer Rugus Nome. Nome was no ordinary Bith, however. He was the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Tenebrous, and in search of the right new apprentice. He would soon get his wish, roughly 200 to 100 years before the Battle of Yavin, arranging Car Damask with another Force-sensitive moon, whose offspring, Hugo Damask, was strong in the Force. Damask reinforces as he grew, manipulating the Force at an early age, using it to ply the feelings of his playmates. In one case, convincing a boy he disliked to commit suicide by jumping from a high window. Tenebrous eventually came to collect his creation, taking the young moon as his apprentice, and dubbing him Darth Plagueis. As the decades went on, Plagueis learned all he could from the Bith. Masquerading as the banker Hugo Damask, Plagueis and his master undermined the Republic whenever the chance presented itself, looking to build on Darth Bane's grand plan, which would culminate in the destruction of the Jedi Order. During a mission to Bald Debnik in 67 BBY, Plagueis decided it was time for him to take the mantle of Dark Lord, betraying Tenebrous, crushing him under huge slabs of stone, and snapping his neck. Plagueis' crown of Dark Lord would be challenged nearly as soon as he got it. On his homeworld of Sojourn, Plagueis would be confronted by Darth Venemus, a secret apprentice his old master trained after realizing he and Plagueis differed in their visions for the eradication of the Jedi. After a challenging duel, Plagueis emerged victorious, and with his place in the galaxy cemented, went in search of an apprentice of his own. While traveling to Naboo to investigate a massive plasma reserve recently discovered under the capital city of Theed, the moon would come into contact with a man simply known as Palpatine. The pair quickly became friends, Plagueis impressed by the young man's ambition, intelligence, and motivations. Palpatine would soon reveal his urge for greater power, and Plagueis would grant it to him, manipulating him into confronting his father. Palpatine did not hesitate, and after murdering his family, became the moon's apprentice. Seeing the young man as insidious, ambitious, and completely lacking in empathy, Darth Plagueis dubbed his new apprentice Darth Sidious. Over the next 3 decades, Plagueis trained Sidious in the ways of the Sith, and with his apprentice's skills in politics, positioned him into the galactic political theater. The first step of Plagueis' master plan was put into motion in 52 BBY, when the pair conspired to assassinate Naboo Senator Vidar Kim. This allowed Palpatine to be elected as the new senator, placing Naboo and 35 other affiliated worlds of the Chomel sector under the direct influence of the Sith. The duo would continue their plan over the next couple of decades, managing to further their goals despite obstacles thrown their way. Plagueis almost didn't live to see it, however, and in 52 BBY, the Mon was attacked by a group of Maladian assassins orchestrated by the Senator Pack's team of Malastare. During this attack, Plagueis had his trachea and blood vessels on the side of his throat severed, yet managed to overcome the assailants. After the failed attempt, Plagueis went into self-induced exile, exclusively devoting himself to his studies, writing everything he learned in a book that Sidious would call the Book of the Sith. Here, Plagueis dived into the secrets of midichlorians, eventually mastering them, able to create life, and take it as easily as he pleased. He wouldn't remain in exile forever, however, and in 32 BBY, along with his apprentice, instigated the Naboo Crisis. This crisis was the opening the Sith needed, and after Chancellor Valorum lost a vote of no confidence, Palpatine became the new Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. By design, Darth Plagueis would now be appointed Co-Chancellor, allowing him to advise his apprentice from the shadows, while allowing him to continue to dive deeper into the secrets of the dark side. Unfortunately for him, he taught his apprentice everything he knew, and the day Palpatine won his election, no longer seeing any use for the moon, killed him in his sleep. His actions resonating from his belief that Plagueis turned away from the grand plan to focus entirely on himself in an egotistical quest for immortality. It truly was ironic. the man obsessed with immortality, the man who could save others from death, couldn't even save himself. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Versus series. I know it's been a minute, but I am super excited to get back into the swing of things with this matchup. After rereading the Darth Plagueis novel for arguably the 100th time, and if you haven't read it, you really should, it's amazing, I realized I wanted to analyze everyone's favorite moon. I debated on who to match him up against, and finally came to the conclusion of Revan. Revan is a character I haven't used on the channel in years, and my ability to analyze characters has vastly improved since I last did a write-up on him. He's also one of my favorites, so matching him up against Plagueis, another favorite of mine, made this battle super fun to put together. For this matchup, I will be using Revan during the Foundry angle, right before his spirit splits. This is mainly due to the fact that Shadow of Revan is, well, OP, arguably one of the most powerful beings in the entire Star Wars mythos. In addition, this version of the character has the power to resurrect himself a la Darth Sion. This obviously presents problems for a video like this. As for using the Foundry version, this is because this is where I feel the character is the most dangerous. At this point, he is no longer the kind, gentle man that he was at the end of KOTOR 1. The years of mental and physical torture killed that in the man. Instead, he is far more cunning and ruthless, willing to do whatever needs to be done in order to achieve his goals. A mindset far more akin to the one he had during the Mandalorian Wars. In addition, his power in the Force had grown since the end of KOTOR 1, making him stronger than he was at any point in time before then, in my opinion. As for Darth Plagueis, I will be using him right before his death at the hands of his apprentice. With that out of the way, I am extremely excited to present the Prodigal Knight Revan versus Darth Plagueis the Wise.
Revan is a human male and is technically 352 years of age at the time of the Foundry Flashpoint. Much like Darth Krayt, Revan's life was extended far beyond its natural lifespan due to the Sith Emperor locking him in a stasis chamber. However, if we remove the time spent in captivity, the Knight is close to around 40 years of age, placing him well within his physical prime. While taller than the average human, Revan wasn't overly imposing, especially compared to others of his time, such as Malak or the hero of Tython. That said, he was still a very impressive physical combatant, with well-rounded traits. One of his most prominent traits was his speed. This is seen in the Jedi Civil War, when he defeated the legendary Ashanti Usanus, perhaps due to his speed. This is made even more impressive considering the Ashanti are said to be able to read their opponent's moves so well they can predict the path of the battle several seconds, sometimes even minutes in advance, by gauging their opponent's fighting style, heart rate, and their movements in combat, with a speed that few can surpass. Perhaps his most impressive display of speed came against the Sith Emperor during the Revan novel. Revan's entire fight with the Sith Emperor, and then T3 attacking, along with Revan being tortured, only happened in a few seconds. This expresses the immense speed of Revan, considering he had to cross a throne room, at least 40 meters long, battle the Emperor where multiple force attacks were used by both men, T3's attack and destruction, and finally, Revan being tortured after falling, all happened in that time frame. So yeah, he's pretty quick. His agility was also highly advanced, dodging blaster shots in multiple instances on the battlefield. My favorite being agile enough to avoid being hit by Basilisk cannon fire while in search of Mandalore the Ultimate's mask on Rekiad. Perhaps even more impressively, he was able to outmaneuver the Sith Emperor's lightning barrage during their duel. Although not overly muscular, Revan's strength was still well-rounded. He was able to match the strength of a Mandalorian mercenary in the dueling arena on Taris, and with his connection to the Force restored, managed to match the strength of Star Forge Amp Darth Malak. An impressive feat when taking into account the Amp, as well as Malak's aggressive and unique style. Revan's stamina and endurance was also top-notch. Years of being on the front lines of major galactic wars molded him to a relentless machine that would not tire nor slow down. He proved this during the Battle of Rakata Prime, infiltrating the Starforge, fighting his way through hordes of Sith warriors and warbots, then engaging and defeating a fallen Bastila Shan, before finally engaging against Malak. The fight against Malak was also not a short affair, with Drew Karpashian, the senior writer of KOTOR, stating that in a book, their fight would have lasted multiple pages. Revan's endurance was also highly developed. He was never slowed down by war, and managed to keep getting back up and fighting, as seen in his many attempts to defeat the Sith Emperor. All in all, while he may not be the most physically imposing, Revan took what his body gave him and used it to an excellent degree. Darth Plagueis is a male moon and was just over a century in age at the time of his death. While compared to humans, moons were known to live well over a century in age, and Plagueis has never been seen to be affected by his age. Moons were a thin, tall humanoid species who originated from the frozen world of Scipio, though they also had a large colony on the planet of Moonalist, as well as the frozen world of Megiddo. Moons were distinguished by their tall, thin bodies, elongated heads with hairless and smooth craniums, and their pasty pale gray skin. Moons were also equipped with 3 hearts, 1 normal heart, and 2 that were consciously controlled, a trait often used to increase blood flow in low temperatures. A feat many also consider to contribute to their long lifespan. In addition, the species was extremely intelligent, oftentimes being some of the best financiers, lawyers, engineers, and diplomats that the galaxy had to offer. While moons were not physically imposing at all, Darth Plagueis was the exception to this rule, years of Sith training molding him into an absolute colossus. His strength was a prime example of this. This can be seen when Plagueis launches a Zabrak across a cabin with a kick, crushing his chest cavity and slamming him against a bulkhead, with enough force to snap his spine and pulp his arteries. While a non-force sensitive, this is still an impressive display, considering that Zabraks are known for their incredible durability and pain resistance. The best example of his strength, however, in my eyes, came against the Melodian assassins, as with his bare hands and in a severely injured state, Plagueis snapped necks, smashes skulls, windpipes, and plunges his fists through armored torsos. Arguably the Dark Lord's best trait, however, was his speed. Oftentimes he appeared at nothing more than a blur of motion, forcing the droid 114D to have to adjust his processing input to properly perceive him. He was also a very nimble and agile combatant for a being of his height. This was displayed to its absolute nth degree while Palpatine and him were on Hypori, with the Dark Lord evading omnidirectional blaster fire from the first ring of nearly 200 heavily armored combat automata by merely twisting and torquing his rangy body. The moon's durability was also very impressive. He displayed this from a young age, and at only 8 years old, without an envirosuit, was capable of enduring some of Megiddo's most violent storms. By the time he was a Sith Lord, Plagueis was able to survive in the same storms with only thin clothing and without any discomfort. Perhaps his greatest display of durability came when Plagueis carried on seemingly unaffected, while a swarm of vicious insects fed off his blood. A disturbing feat, no doubt. While built like a stone pillar, Plagueis did have one glaring physical weakness, that being his face mask. After his attempted assassination at the hands of the Melodians, Plagueis was left disfigured and parts of his face and neck needed to be amputated. This forced him to necessitate a transpirator mask to breathe. While this mask allowed him to be immune to airborne attacks, for example, in this matchup it will not benefit him. However, it does provide an obvious weakness for the Dark Lord, as if it failed or was damaged, Plagueis would suffocate. A glaring weakness his apprentice took full advantage of. The moon also showed the effects of dark side degradation, sporting minor hindrances such as pale skin and golden eyes common amongst Sith Lords. While this may have been a nuisance, Plagueis was able to counteract these effects, as well as the effects brought on by his age due to his midichlorian manipulation. Despite being a relatively unimposing species, Plagueis was absolutely a deviation from this rule, and crafted his body into a well-trained machine. This round is fairly straightforward in my eyes. To begin, we need to analyze the biological differences between the two. Revan is a human male and in/nearing the end of his physical prime, whereas Plagueis is a moon and over a century in age. At face value, humans are a vastly superior species when it comes to physical combat. The moons, after all, get their advantage from their advanced intelligence, not through their intimidating physique. But Darth Plagueis isn't an ordinary moon. Years of training crafted his body into an elite fighting machine. He took full advantage of his species' frame, providing him greater reach and agility compared to humans, and most other species for that matter. And when combined with his 2 additional hearts, granting him advanced cardiovascular abilities, it's clear Plagueis' biology is greater than that of Revan's. In terms of strength, I once again give the advantage to Darth Plagueis. While Revan being able to match the strength of a Starforged enhanced Darth Malak is impressive, Plagueis' showings are greater, and even his lesser impressive, albeit still impressive feats such as plunging his fist through armored torsos, Revan has never been shown to have this in him. You'd think if he did, he would have used it in the Mandalorian Wars, punching through the armor of the famed Jedi Hunters. When it comes to speed, however, I grant a slight edge to Revan. While the Moon is not slow in any way, shape, or form, Revan's speed is just superior in my eyes. His displays against the Enchanti are just too much for me to ignore, and Plagueis has never been seen capable of defeating an opponent with pure speed in the same regard. As for agility, I deem the pair equals, both able to quickly move their bodies at a moment's notice, and outmaneuvering objects most beings would die from. In Revan's case against a cannon fire of the Basilisk War Droid, and in Plagueis' case, evading omnidirectional blaster fire from multiple heavily armored combat automata. As for durability, once again Darth Plagueis gets the edge. While Revan has been on the front lines of countless wars and battles, he has never taken the beating that Plagueis has. His ability to fight on against the Maladian assassins despite massive amounts of damage is one of the more impressive physical feats in Star Wars. While Plagueis' transporter mass presented an obvious weakness in target, Revan would still need to damage it in order for it to turn into a liability, a task easier said than done. At the end of the day, Darth Plagueis' superior biology, as well as his more impressive physical displays, grant him the edge. Darth Plagueis gets the physical edge. Revan was considered to be one of, if not the best lightsaber duelist of his era. From an early age, the young man showed the hunger to learn, and learning the art of lightsaber combat was no exception. Learning from the great masters of his day, including Jar Leston, Dorak, and Kreia, Revan was recognized as a master duelist by his peers, and proved it on multiple occasions, whether on the battlefield or by defeating the greatest warriors of his day. Shockingly, Revan's lightsaber style is never confirmed in any official source. However, KOTOR 1 senior writer and Revan novel author Drew Karpyshyn, a pretty good source if you ask me, states Revan would have generally used Form 6 Nyman, believing him to be more of a generalist, an opinion that I agree with. A hybrid fighting style, Nyman incorporated elements from the previous forms and balanced out their various specializations. Form 6 covered many of the various moves of lightsaber combat, but due to its emphasis on overall moderation, its focus on blade work was somewhat relaxed. Nyman was a jack-of-all-trades style, and the success of this form was largely dependent on the practitioner's intuition, improvisation, and creativity. It should be noted that while Nyman provided no decisive edge in battle, it also had no major flaws. As stated in countless of my Versus videos, including Naga Sadow vs Darth Warlock III, I explained that I thought Nyman masters usually came in 3 distinct flavors. Them being, those who studied Form 6 as a supplement to their Force abilities, or focused on another discipline altogether and didn't truly focus on martial might, such as Johan Othone, masters who use the style passively, using Nyman's adaptability to counter an opponent's style, adjusting their technique to suit the needs of the moment. And finally, a user who took all the styles and constantly changed forms in the midst of combat to overwhelm, confuse, and overpower opponents. In my eyes, Revan was without a doubt the second flavor. In addition to Form 6, I also feel that due to Revan's hunger for knowledge, as well as his mastery of lightsaber combat, suggests that he mastered all 7 forms of classical lightsaber combat. This is made all the more credible when considering his preferred style involves seamlessly using all the forms, adapting to any situation using the nuances of Form 6. In order to implement such a form, Revan was equipped with a single-bladed lightsaber. This lightsaber was constructed during his retraining and was of basic design, made with an alloy metal and featured triangular circular arching design, creating spikes at the top of the emitter. Originally it was powered with a blue crystal, most likely found in the crystal caves of Dantooine. However, he soon changed it to green, and by the time of the Foundry Flashpoint was equipped with a purple crystal. This crystal was most likely natural, granting his blade greater maneuverability at the expense of cutting power. Unlike many Jedi, Revan was also equipped with armor. This suit of armor was very similar to that he wore as a Sith Lord, as well as his Mandalorian mask. While this suit would most likely defend against projectiles, blasters, and many melee weapons, I think it's safe to say that a dedicated lightsaber strike would still go through it. Still, some protection is better than none. As a master of all 7 forms, Revan's form was dependent on the situation at hand. While on the battlefield engaged against multiple enemies, such as when he dueled multiple Dark Jedi aboard the Starforge, he would use Form 1 Chicho. Using the form's speciality towards engaging multiple opponents, Revan would attack with diagonal strikes, bouncing from opponent to opponent seamlessly, increasing his speed as the fight progressed. He would do this before cutting them down with either quick, fast slashes and cuts, or the devastating Form 1 technique, dubbed the Sarlacc Sweep. On those same battlefields against ranged opponents, such as those Mandalorians on Cathar, Revan wielded Form 5, specifically the Xi'an variant. This is made all the more notable with his use of the reverse hand grip, a staple of the form. Finally, against one-on-one opponents, Revan would utilize Forms 4 and 7. While a Jedi, he would focus on Ataru, relying on a combination of strength, speed, and agility to unleash wide, fast, and powerful swings. Whereas as a Sith, Revan would focus on Form 7 Juyo, focusing on bold, direct staccato sequences to eviscerate a lone enemy. By the time of the Foundry, I believe he would have merged these two styles into one moment utilizing the graceful aggressive sequences of Ataru, before opening up to the more chaotic and unpredictable sequences of Juyo. He would do this more and more aggressively until he had achieved victory, doing whatever needed to be done in order to accomplish his goals. Revan also wasn't an aggressive brute who just looked to overpower his foes. In combination with his blade work, he would keep his opponents guessing even more by employing feints, counterattacks, and mass deceptions. Key traits Canderous Ordo, the future Mandalore the Preserver, observed Revan employed during the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian Wars. While never confirmed, I also believe Revan to have knowledge of the rare Trikata style. This belief stems from the fact that Revan trained under the Jedi Master Kreia, and his thirst for knowledge would have led him to learn everything he could from her. It is also stated in KOTOR 2 that Revan meticulously mastered everything Kreia and the other Jedi Masters knew, implying that he would have learned this rare skill from his master. Trikata was built off deception, and the retractable blade on the lightsaber, quickly shutting off, then reigniting the blade, could confuse one's opponent, allowing for diversionary feints in combat. Revan has also been seen employing Jar Kai dual blade fencing. He mostly employed this style while a Sith Lord, using his immense speed and extra blade to once more overpower his opponents. However, by the time of the Foundry, Revan seems to have abandoned this approach in favor of his single blade. While his blade work was no doubt impressive, the bread and butter of Revan's style involved chaining in his force powers into his lightsaber sequences. He would throw one of them while keeping his opponents guessing. For instance, he could be engaging at one angle before subtly changing it, opening up his foe for a blast of force lightning. Or perhaps while aggressively attacking with his blade, he would throw a feint and follow it up with a devastating telekinetic wave. This was the core aspect of the Knight's signature style, and was on full display whenever matched up in lightsaber combat. This also makes sense as while Revan is skilled with the blade, his ultimate power lies in his skill in the Force. Revan's greatest combative advantage, however, is his masterful tactical mind. Not only is he one of the greatest in his era, but rather one of the greatest in galactic history. His great tactical mind allowed him to push the Mandalorians back, so much so that Mandalore the Preserver claimed that they had no chance to win. After his fall, his tactics allowed the Empire to sweep through the Republic with such devastating speed, causing Jedi Master Doric to claim Revan's Sith was all but invincible. However, his finest tactical display came against the Enchanti. The Enchanti are known for their ability to anticipate attacks before they happen, and counterattacking, and can apply this ability to larger military battles, and even in wars. When Revan and the Enchanti inevitably came to blows, his own mastery of this skill, in addition to his brilliant mind, allowed him to outright slaughter them. At the end of the day, while a great lightsaber combatant, Revan was still a man of his form. He was a generalist, very good at everything, while not necessarily amazing in one particular field. He overcomes this by incorporating his immense force abilities, or implementing his more obscure skills such as Jar Kai. But it's his tactical genius, not his overall skill, that allowed him to gain his reputation as the greatest combatant of his day. Unlike his master Darth Tenebrous, who put the lightsaber first and enjoyed a good fight, Darth Plagueis couldn't be bothered, going as far to state the lightsaber duels were a tedious affair. Despite this attitude, Plagueis came from a line of incredibly talented lightsaber combatants, and he too followed in his line's history. Even though he believed the Sith had outgrown their use of lightsabers, using them only to humiliate the Jedi, he was proclaimed a master of the art by his master, and when push comes to shove, was still a formidable lightsaber combatant when forced. This was proven during his duel with Darth Venemus on Sojourn, where he was able to defeat the Bith. This is quite an impressive feat considering Venemus was trained by Tenebrous to be an expert in Plagueis' style, and had been molded specifically to defeat and ultimately take Plagueis' spot. Although the Moon's preferred style is never stated, due to his contempt for lightsaber dueling and his primary focus being the deepest mysteries of the Force, I believe he was a practitioner of the sixth form of lightsaber combat, Nine Man. This is reinforced by his teaching of Sidious, who adopted the form as his preferred martial style. As stated earlier in the video, Nine Man was a hybrid fighting style incorporating elements from the previous forms and balancing out their various specializations. Form 6 covered many of the various moves of lightsaber combat, but due to its emphasis on overall moderation, its focus on blade work was somewhat relaxed. Nine Man was a jack-of-all-trades style, and the success of the form was largely dependent on the practitioner's intuition, improvisation, and creativity. It should be noted that while Nine Man proved no decisive edge in battle, it also had no major flaws. Once again, as I stated earlier in this video, I believe Nine Man Masters usually came in 3 distinct flavors, them being those who studied Form 6 as a supplement to their Force abilities or focused on another discipline and didn't focus on martial might, such as Johan Othone. Masters who use the style passively, using Nine Man's adaptability to counter an opponent's style, adjusting their technique to suit the needs of any moment. And finally, a user who took all the styles and constantly changed forms in the midst of combat to overwhelm, confuse, and overpower opponents. It's pretty clear that Plagueis is the first flavor. This is made more obvious when considering his primary focus was his knowledge of the Force. To fight this style, Plagueis employed a single-bladed red lightsaber. It was a relatively simple weapon, its most notable features being an elongated hilt to account for Plagueis' moon biology. Powering this weapon was a single red synthetic crystal. This gave the weapon more cutting power at the expense of maneuverability. In addition to his preferred style, I also believe Plagueis had a solid understanding of the 7 traditional forms of lightsaber combat, if not an outright master of them. This comes down to the fact that once again, he was the man who trained Sidious, a noted master of all 7 forms of lightsaber combat. In addition, Plagueis was a being who demanded his skill set be versatile, allowing him to adapt and be ready for any potential situation. Knowing all 7 forms seems like the place to start for a man wishing to be versatile, including against other Force wielders. He took this one step farther, molding himself into a combatant that could handle any type of situation or wield any type of weapon. The best example of this can be seen in his engagement with the Cursed Warriors, wielding only a Force pike and easily squashing his way through the opposition without suffering an injury. When this versatility was combined with his moon biology, Plagueis became an absolute unit, overwhelming and overpowering most who came across him. Plagueis' approach to combat was very simple, yet also very effective. While on the offensive, the Dark Lord remained balanced and focused. He would blend together quick hacks and powerful chops in an attempt to run through his adversary. He would also use his species' inherent advantages and attempt to outmaneuver his opponent, as well as exercising his often massive reach advantage. He took the same mindset while in the defensive, executing simple direct blade work to deflect and parry incoming attacks, with his ultimate goal of initiating a devastating counterattack. Or if he saw fit, he would utilize his great agility, moving with great speed in an effort to grant him a better opening. He would once again also use his body to his advantage defensively. He would constantly be on the move and use his devastating reach to keep his opponents at bay, while also using his long limbs to confuse his opponents and ultimately open them up for a counterstrike. The best example of this can be seen in his duel against Venemus, taking himself out of his body and working his material self like a marionette, a move that ultimately threw the Bith off, all but ending his life. In addition to his single blade, Darth Plagueis was skilled in the Form 6 variant of Jar-Kai dual blade fencing. He displayed his proficiency in this skill after murdering Tenebrous, wielding the Bith's weapon beside his own with great success. His chosen discipline also opens the door for chaining Force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, something a being as powerful as Plagueis took full advantage of. He demonstrated this during his battle against the Maladians, unleashing a Force wave, as well as against Venemus. While he hasn't been shown using his other abilities such as Force Lightning or Force Choke, I do believe if he wanted to, he would have no difficulty incorporating them in the midst of combat. Similarly, Plagueis has never been seen incorporating physical strikes into his lightsaber sequences, and once again, I do believe that if he wanted to, he would have no difficulty incorporating them, his nasty strikes against the Maladians backing up this theory. Although Darth Plagueis primarily furthered his knowledge of the Force, he was not slacking when it came to his martial tactics. His tactics allowed him to be viable in any given situation, whether against a saber-wielding foe, horde of assassins, or expert marksman. He would also analyze the styles of his opponent, gauging their style for any flaws he can exploit. The Dark Lord displayed this while fighting Venemus, noticing how the Bith would toss his lightsaber from hand to hand, mixing different forms. He proved this again while watching Sidious train Maul, quickly pointing out the sequences of Form 6 and Teräs Käsi in the Zabrak style. However, Plagueis was the definition of a reactionary fighter. While against lesser competition he would hammer through them in fairly short order, against fighters with greater or equal skill, he was always following their lead, never dictating the action in the fight. However, I don't necessarily feel this to be a huge disadvantage that many make this out to be. In my eyes, there's nothing wrong with being a reactionary counterattacking style of fighter. All it means is he can only get so far against certain opponents, such as passive fighters, who don't give him anything to counter and read. Once again, this doesn't mean he was a bad fighter. I'd easily place him on the same level as the Phantom Menace Sidious, something Plagueis author James Luceno also suggests. Despite his simplistic style, Darth Plagueis was not one to be taken lightly. Doing so would no doubt result in a quick and swift death. This round is a bit challenging. While on the surface this round may seem pretty straightforward, I don't believe this to be the case. Starting from the top, both Revan and Darth Plagueis were considered to be amongst the greatest of their day, and both favored Nyman as their preferred lightsaber styles. Both also featured a skill set that would come in handy in any situation they would encounter, whether in a one-on-one setting or on the battlefield against multiple adversaries. However, that is where the similarities end. Where Revan favored an overwhelming and aggressive approach, Plagueis preferred a more balanced approach, and this could not be more obvious in the way that these two employed their preferred styles. Offensively, I deem the pair to be equals. While Revan's offensive approach is more aggressive and overwhelming, I'm not sure that it's that much better than the way Plagueis attacks when considering his biology, especially considering this would press Revan in a way he has never seen before. Defensively, the edge goes to Plagueis. Revan has a well-rounded base that would allow him to fend off an attack before ultimately returning to the offensive. However, Plagueis can also fend off these strikes, and in my opinion, more efficiently, especially when he starts leaning into his body, working himself like a marionette. If he is able to hold off Darth Venemus, a being who is arguably on par with him from a power standpoint, and knew his lightsaber style inside and out, I think it's fair to say that Plagueis could manage to weather the storm Revan brings his way. Tactically, Revan holds the clear edge here. While Plagueis is no dummy, Revan is arguably the greatest tactician the galaxy had ever seen. With that said, Revan's tactics became a fair bit more one-sided come the time of the Foundry Flashpoint. He still thinks ahead, but his tactics are far more straightforward. Whereas he may have taken a step back to take 2 steps forward at the end of KOTOR, by now, he would rather blast his way through with his force powers, ultimately doing whatever he needed to achieve victory. It's no longer looking at the big picture, rather, what can I do right now? Regardless, he still gets the edge for tactics, just not by as wide of a margin as, let's say, KOTOR 1 Revan would have. Although Revan may have more experience, I don't believe his raw skill to be on the same level as that of Plagueis when it comes to lightsaber dueling. I think a good comparison of Revan's skill with the blade would be that of Darth Maul. Ironically enough, this is also the tier I would place Darth Venemus. Both could handle themselves well against the best of their era, but when placed against a true master, they eventually capitulate. On the contrary, Plagueis is on the same level as that of Phantom Menace Sidious, who I would place in the Dooku tier, a clear tier above Revan in this field. This isn't to sell Revan short, because he is a good combatant. He just doesn't possess the raw skill that Plagueis does, and his true skill and passion resided in his power of the Force. While one could argue experience outweighs raw skill, I disagree. I could practice throwing a football every day for my entire life, and I would still not be able to throw the football as well as Josh Allen. Experience is important, but skill ultimately helps the cream rise to the top. On top of this, Revan's combative approach plays perfectly in the way Plagueis wants to fight. He would press the moon constantly, granting Plagueis the opportunity to recognize his opponent's patterns before he finds a way to capitalize. Ultimately, it comes down to whether or not Revan's tactical brilliance can overcome the skill gap and his own approach. And I just don't believe it is. Darth Plagueis gets the edge. Power. That is what Revan embodied. According to Kreia, a powerful Force wielder in her own right, claimed he was like staring into the heart of the Force, and even then, you could see the Jedi he would slay etched on his soul. Revan's power in the Force was unique in the sense that he mastered both sides, revered by the Jedi as a hero and a beacon of the light, and venerated by the Sith as Darth Revan the Butcher. By the time of the Foundry, Revan was unlike any other Force wielder. able to call on both sides of the Force when needed, able to call on the purest aspects of the light and the most unnatural and twisted aspects of the dark at will. Like all Force wielders, Revan was able to use the Force to augment his physical attributes, and while calling the light, paired it with Force Valor, and when calling upon the dark, used Dark Rage, boosting his own speed, strength, and dexterity. He furthered to boost his speed through his use of Force Speed. This ability allowed him to maintain sprinting speeds for a brief time, as well as granting him even greater boosts to his speed. This slight boost made Revan's already formidable speed all the more impressive. In terms of more traditional powers, Revan was an absolute beast in his use of telekinesis. The best example of his skill in this technique can be seen during the Battle of the Foundry, where he pulled down around 40 large asteroids with such force they pulverized on impact. While often employing telekinesis in devastating fashion, Revan was more than capable of applying it with subtlety and precision, credited with skill in both Force Wound as well as Force Whirlwind. Force Wound was a power that allowed the user to telekinetically apply pressure to their opponent's organs or body. If not resisted, it could crush the victim's heart or lungs. While not confirmed, I do believe Revan to be skilled in, if not an outright master, of Force Crush, a more devastating version of Force Wound. This comes from the fact that his master Kreia was a regular user of the skill, and Revan is implied to have learned all he could from his master. Not to mention, with his skill in the Force, it only makes sense he could master a nastier version. As for Force Whirlwind, it was a more advanced form of Force Push and a rather feeble version of Force Wave. The Jedi would alter the air currents around an opponent, turning it into a maelstrom. This swirling force would lift an opponent into the air, spin them around, and then leave them incapable of moving out of it. Revan made heavy use of this technique during the Jedi Civil War, most notably against a group of Tuskens on Tatooine. The Jedi Master also used telekinesis for the defensive. He would use it to create a barrier, or wall of Force energy around the intended target, be it self, friend, or foe. He used this during the Battle of the Foundry against the Imperial Strike Team, temporarily forming an impenetrable bubble on the brink of death. While impressive, no doubt, Revan also has been seen affected by such attacks. Against Darth Malak, he was hit by Force Whirlwind, and against Bastila Shan, he left himself open to a telekinetic strike. In addition to his other TK feats, Revan was also confirmed to be capable of the saber throw ability, yet rarely, if ever, implemented the skill in combat. After his fall to the dark side, Revan learned many secrets the dark side had to offer. He became a quick expert in the art of Force Lightning, and by the time of the Foundry, was able to summon storms of lightning. One of the more obscure dark abilities Revan had at his disposal was Force Slow. This power clouded the target's mind, causing them to slow down, both mentally and physically. In addition, Revan was a practice hand in the use of Force Drain. Force Drain rekindled Force energy in the user, offensively draining the Force energy from those whom the power was turned upon. With that said, despite having knowledge of this power, he has never displayed its use in combat, unlike the likes of Darth Nihilus and Traya. Much like his lightsaber style, Revan mastered different Force techniques in order to suit his own needs of the moment. This is obvious with his skill of Metu Mactor, or Ionize. Ionize was a power developed during the Old Sith Wars that allowed a Jedi to overload and damage electronic systems, such as droids. He used it heavily during the Jedi Civil War, using it on countless Sith warbots and turrets. He also displayed its use during a high-intensity duel, using the ability to malfunction the captive Jedi cells aboard the Starforge and help them become one with the Force. Perhaps Revan's most potent skills came in his use of telepathy. He proved this in his many mental battles with the Sith Emperor. While imprisoned and bound to the Emperor's mind via Sith alchemy, he managed to resist the endless torment and telepathic attacks, before augmenting Vitiate's fear of death and influencing him to postpone his planned invasion for 3 centuries. If 3 centuries of postponing war wasn't enough, once war finally did break out, he managed to convince the Emperor that peace was his only option, despite conquering half the galaxy and leaving the Republic capital of Coruscant in flames. Without the intervention of Revan, there's no question the Sith Empire would have emerged victorious in the Great Galactic War. In terms of combatively viable telepathic techniques, Revan was a master of the classical Jedi mind trick. He took this ability to its highest levels, using the move on Mode of the Hutt. What makes this more impressive is the fact that Hutts are notoriously difficult to influence or read through the Force. A more sinister telepathic power in Revan's arsenal was Force Fear. This was essentially a more twisted version of the mind trick, where the user would strike directly at the deepest parts of the target's mind, causing an uncontrollable shaking fear that would wreak havoc with the target's capabilities. Depending on the victim, Force Fear would cause them to either cower defenselessly or flee from their opponent outright. Revan's willpower against these attacks must also be discussed. This is a man who was able to break free from Emperor Vitiate's mind control, a feat accomplished only by him, Malak, and the hero of Tython, Some consciously resisted the Jedi Council's attempt to fully erase his memories, and resisted the combined telepathic attacks of Emperor Vitiate and the Dread Masters, a group of 6 immensely powerful Sith Lords, capable of ravaging Republic fleets with waves of hatred and bringing the Outlander to his knees from across the galaxy. It's safe to say, using telepathy would be a wasted effort against the Revanchist. Like many Sith Lords, Revan was credited with the Force Scream ability, capable of unleashing an enraged scream that triggered shockwaves that rippled through the Force. This caused devastation to any that were unfortunate enough to be within his proximity. During his time as Dark Lord, Revan managed to learn the Force Concealment ability. This power allowed the user to mask their Force alignment, their ability to use the Force, or even their entire presence from other Force sensitives. His mastery of this ability was on full display in the Korriban Academy, teaching armies of Sith assassins this ability. This is even more impressive considering the success these assassins had, becoming notorious for sneaking in on even the most skilled Jedi Knights. Much like his other prominent abilities, Revan was a master in the healing arts, skilled in both traditional Force healing, as well as the dark side variant Dark Healing. Force healing is a Force technique that can heal wounds and ease pains, including otherwise fatal wounds. However, in order to utilize this technique, I feel Revan would have to meditate and not be able to use this ability on the fly, similar to that of Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi. Along with his overwhelming offensive powers, Revan was not lacking defensively, mastering the art of Tutaminis. This ability allowed the user to deflect an oncoming attack, usually projectiles and blaster bolts. Revan took the skill a step higher, demonstrating the ability to not only absorb Sith lightning, but redirect it back at his attacker with more lethality. Darth Nihilus fatally learned this firsthand, trying to end Revan with her lightning before he effortlessly absorbed it and deflected it back at her, turning her to ash. This is extremely impressive when taking into account Nihilus was a master of the dark side who sat on the Dark Council for more than 20 years, the third longest tenure at the time, as well as the fact that under normal conditions, her Force lightning turned 2 guards to charred husks and forced Meetra Surik and Scourge, 2 of the most powerful Force users of their age, to not deflect it with their lightsabers, but completely jump out of the way. And Revan casually absorbed it and sent it back her way, turning her to nothing but ash. Fuck. In addition, the Jedi was proficient in the ability to detoxify poisons or eject them from his body in a much shorter amount of time than what would normally be possible. Revan's most devastating Force powers, which is saying a lot, came in the form of his knowledge of Sith rituals. It is implied that he understood the inner workings of the Ritual of Nathema, the most elaborate Sith ritual in history, which drained the life force of 8,000 Sith Lords and the entire planet into Emperor Vitiate. Using this knowledge, he created countless devastating rituals and stored their knowledge in his Sith holocron. These rituals were so twisted and dark that even Darth Bane, the fabled Sithari, couldn't comprehend their potential and doubt he would ever dare to use them. With that said, he did use one of them, the ritual which became known as the Thought Bomb. This legendary ritual was capable of annihilating tens of thousands of Jedi and Sith, trapping their spirits in a sphere of Force energy. While no doubt impressive, these rituals often took time and required additional beings, making their combative viability nearly zero. Although, it does show how skilled he was as a Force wielder, able to master an incredibly difficult, if not the most difficult aspect of the dark side. Without question, Revan's most impressive ability came after his defeat on the Foundry, where he managed to survive his physical death, becoming one with the Force, returning in times of crisis as a Force ghost. Revan was without a doubt one of the greatest Force wielders in galactic history. His rare ability to master both the light and the dark left him in extraordinarily rare company. A being engineered to be the essence of raw power, Darth Plagueis the Wise lived up to his design, becoming a nexus of dark side power, embracing its teachings, noting that the power of the dark side is an illness that no true Sith would wish to be cured of. His power was respected, if not outright feared by his peers, with Sidious, despite being over a decade into his training, highlighting that his master remained powerful beyond his comprehension, and the puppeteer behind his birth, and master Darth Tenebrous, finding Plagueis' connection to the Force to be considerably greater than he'd ever suspected. With this raw potential, the Moon didn't take the easy road out, digging in headfirst into the nature of the Force, earning the reputation of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Like all Force wielders, Darth Plagueis was able to use the Force to augment his physical attributes, and paired it with Force Rage, using his anger and pain to boost his own speed, strength, and ferocity. In addition to his physical boosts, Plagueis was able to use the Force to boost his senses to the absolute nth degree. He demonstrated this well on Naboo, amplifying his auditory senses to pick up a conversation out of earshot. In terms of telekinesis, Plagueis was an all-around master. He was capable of powerful force pushes and shoves, doing so with incredible speed and power. This was how he mortally wounded Tenebrous, pulling down massive plummeting slabs with such speed and momentum that Tenebrous barely registered what hit him. When unleashing all his power, his application was nothing short of nuclear. He showed this while engaged with the Melodian assassins, unleashing a force wave that all but atomizes a dozen armored Melodians, the results of which were mistook as caused by an explosive. Plagueis wasn't just an overwhelming brute either, using the technique on a microscopic level to manipulate nanosyringes. Using telekinesis for defense was also child's play for the Sith Lord, capable of powerful force shields. He once again demonstrated this power against the Melodians, using it in a severely weakened state, warding off a flurry of vibroblade attacks. Telepathy were also very strong tactics used by the Moon. He had a natural talent for this ability, and before the age of 5 was capable of manipulating the emotions of his playmates. In one instance, mind-tricking another Moon child into jumping out of a window, merely because Plagueis didn't like him. Another trick the Dark Lord was fond of was probing the minds of those around him. He accomplished this on multiple occasions, the two most glaring examples being when he compelled a murderous Yanchuri subject to become peaceful, and when he read Jabba the Hutt like a book to determine he wasn't lying. This is incredibly impressive when considering both Yanchuri and Hutts were two species with inherent immunities to telepathic attacks. He was also able to implement this against trained Force wielders, casually doing so against Venomius and a young Sidious. Plagueis also had a powerful Force sense, taking full advantage of it, being able to perceive glimpses of the future. This can be seen after Palpatine murdered his family, where the Moon sensed the fallout from across the galaxy, seeing visions of past, present, and future in the process. As is the case with most Sith Lords, Darth Plagueis was a practiced hand in the use of Force lightning. He developed multiple uses for this skill, ranging from utilitarian, using it to short electronics, as well as with lethality, using it against an Iktachi priestess, bringing her blood to a boil and almost setting her hands aflame. A favorite technique amongst Dark Lords, Darth Plagueis was no exception, and was no stranger to the Force choke ability. He used this on Sidious, catching the young man off guard. He also called upon the dark side to use the Force scream technique. The poor Melodian assassins found this out firsthand, as despite having his trachea severed and the lower half of his jawbone removed, Plagueis summoned a shockwave that shattered their eardrums, and all within a 10-meter radius. As is the case with Dark Lady of the Sith Lumaya, Plagueis has been seen to create powerful Force illusions. He did so against Sidious, creating a lifelike projection of himself, tricking him into thinking it was really him. In terms of defensive powers, Darth Plagueis was a master in Tuta Menace. He was more than capable of deflecting/absorbing blaster bolts with his bare hands, and like masters of this technique, was capable of redirecting the attack back at his assailants. He was also able to alter the environment around him, giving him added protection when needed. This was the case on Maigito, manipulating a snowstorm swirling around him, so as not to be touched by a single flake of ice, all melting before they could reach him. The intricate healing arts were no challenge for the Moon, Plagueis himself noting that mending damaged body parts was no more difficult than levitating slabs of stone. Although it was believed Darkside Force users could not employ Force healing, this was the wrong assumption. The dark side could in fact be used to heal, but such power often came at a terrible price. This also never truly healed a being in the intended manner, rather bending the will of the Force, providing temporary effects. His application of healing follows this to a T. In one case, he merely limited the damage to his back after being pulped by a projectile, and momentarily stabilized a mortally wounded Zabrak. In both instances, he merely stopped the bleeding, so to speak, and so truly didn't heal the affected ailments. To allow him to continue his ruse as Hugo Damask, Plagueis became an expert in Force concealment, granting him the power to mask his Force alignment, his ability to use the Force, and even his entire presence from other Force sensitives. In one instance, he managed to conceal himself in such an effective manner that even his apprentice failed to sense his presence in the Force. In even more impressive fashion, Plagueis managed to stand and socialize in the same room as Masters Yoda and Windu without being detected. Yoda and Mace being arguably the two strongest Force wielders in the Order at the time, no mean feat. And now, we get to Plagueis' ultimate power, the ability to cheat life and death itself, his mastery of midi-chlorian manipulation. Midi-chlorian manipulation was a form of Sith alchemy and required immense knowledge of the dark side of the Force. Through this knowledge, the user was able to create, maintain, or destroy life through the influencing of midi-chlorians. Plagueis was capable of all three. His personal droid 114D, noted as Zeus stocked in Plagueis' creatures, conjured up from the Moon's imagination, all created through the Force. He used the ability to maintain and resurrect life, doing so multiple times to Darth Venemus. If he wanted, Plagueis was also capable of using this to prevent others from dying altogether, a skill Sidious would mention when manipulating Anakin Skywalker during the events of Revenge of the Sith. And finally, Plagueis could use this power to kill someone outright, where he would trigger a mass die-off of the target's midichlorians, and in this way, sever them from the Force. He did this to King Varuna, causing a long and painful death. However, perhaps Plagueis' greatest accomplishment in the Force was his ability to alter the cosmic force itself. Applying the power of will, Plagueis in concert with Sidious engineered an unprecedented and permanent imbalance in the Force, causing a cosmic shift to the dark side. This resulted in the Jedi being crippled in their ability to sense the future, despite having fashioned a galaxy-spanning cosmic force bubble that protected them from the dark side's influence. This single action alone was so unnatural, the Force responded by conceiving the prophesized Chosen One to oppose them, a being of pure force, destined to destroy the Sith and restore balance. A true academic, Darth Plagueis lived up to his wise reputation, and the power he possessed few ever obtain. This round is pretty straightforward in my eyes. Both Revan and Darth Plagueis were some of the strongest Force wielders the galaxy had ever known. Both were capable of raw, overwhelming power, while also rounding out their skill sets to accomplish their goals in any given scenario. In terms of telekinesis, the edge goes to Revan. Both are able to unleash devastating Force waves, subtly use the power when needed, and create barriers when pushed to the edge. That said, Revan just has more options at his disposal, Force Wound and Force Whirlwind just to name a few. As telepaths, Revan once again gets the edge. Both are able to convince others to do their bidding, even to species with inherent strengths against such attacks. But Revan's defensive capabilities grant him the slight edge. The man is a wall, and if Emperor Vitiate couldn't crack him for 300 years, I don't think Plagueis will in an impromptu fight. In terms of their more conventional dark-side abilities, I believe the pair to be equals, with both Plagueis and Revan have been mastering techniques like Force Lightning, Force Choke, and Force Scream. This is where the similarities end between the two, and their primary focuses concerning their Force branched off into two different directions. Revan was at the forefront of many wars. This required him to lean on skills that would be beneficial in the midst of combat, and this can be seen with his knowledge of Force Drain, Force Slow, Ionize, and many more. Plagueis, on the other hand, was more of an academic learner, preferring to understand and master the fundamental principles of the Force in an attempt to become immortal. This led to him mastering his midichlorian manipulation. While incredibly impressive, a feat only one has achieved, its combative viability is lacking. He has only used it in the midst of combat once on a non-Force sensitive King Varuna, and it required intense focus and time to complete, time he most definitely would not have against a being such as Revan. In addition, despite his ability to manipulate the cosmic force itself, which is an insane feat, it has next to no value in a contest such as this. These two men come from completely different backgrounds, which led to this wide difference in their Force focuses. Where Revan was a weapon on the battlefield, on the front lines of some of the galaxy's most notorious battles, Plagueis was a new breed of Sith. Where the Sith once wore armor, they now wear cloaks, operating in the shadows, achieving victories as a contagion, rather than through subjugation. While their overall power is similar, Revan has far more to work with, granting him a clear advantage. Revan gets the edge.
And finally, we come to the verdict. If these juggernauts of the Force ever came face to face on the battlefield, who would win? Let's say it takes place in the forests of Alderaan, with the winner winning a solid 7 out of 10 times. Running through the forest, Revan was in a hurry. He felt a dark presence on this planet, and it assumed it was of the Sith Emperor's doing. As he moved, he felt the dark presence become closer and closer, until he stumbled upon a tall, thin being. That tall, thin being turned, his face scarred and equipped with a breathing device of some sort. Plagueis was his name, an essence of raw dark side power. "What is your purpose here?" Revan announced, ready to go at any moment. Plagueis merely laughed. While he had been on the planet examining a new being of his creation, he hadn't bothered to respond. Instead, he felt the raw power emanating from the man before him. It was then when the moon thought of all the experiments he could do with a creature as strong as the one before him. "It doesn't matter," the moon finally stated. "In the end, there is only one fate for you, Jedi." Plagueis reached from his robe and ignited his red blade. Revan merely smirked under his mask. "I am no Jedi, nor am I Sith." Reaching for his purple blade, he ignited the weapon and screamed, "I am Revan." In a blaze of light, Revan lunged and was wailing hard on Plagueis. The moon was standing his ground for the most part. He had never endured an attack as overwhelming as the one before him now. The fast pace and aggressive strikes would have been nothing more than a purple and red flash to a casual observer, the pair moving with such speed, unlike anything most would have ever seen. Picking up on certain sequences, Plagueis started to counterattack. He had an idea of what to expect and began to parry with quick counterattacks. Revan, however, wasn't backing down. Anticipating another counterstrike, Revan threw a feint before reaching out into the Force with his mind. A rustling of leaves began on the forest floor before a downed tree branch came flying, as if it were shot out of a cannon. At the last moment, Plagueis picked up on the attack, using his advanced agility to contort his body out of the way. The slight opening was exactly what Revan was hoping for. He moved his blade up and performed a quick upward sweep in hopes of removing the strange being's arm from the rest of his body. Plagueis' nose was suddenly hit with the stench of burning cloth. He was lucky. The being that called himself Revan just missed his arm, merely cutting a hole in the Dark Lord's cloak. The early fight goes to Revan. His overwhelming approach would allow him to take the lead in the fight, dictating the pace of the battle. Plagueis would accept this, wishing to analyze his foe. He wouldn't be totally on the defensive and would be looking for openings, but they would be few and far between at this point in the contest. The gaping hole in his cloak was a warning sign for Plagueis. He couldn't underestimate this foe. He was recognizing certain aspects of his opponent's form, but if he wasn't careful, the man across from him would break his defenses again, something that could be fatal. Recognizing this potentially devastating outcome, Plagueis remembered his duel against Venomius, the bastardized Sith apprentice his old master trained to cut him down. He took himself out of his body and began working his body like a figurine. Cutting back on his offensive, he no longer looked to counterstrike, at least not yet. He became a wall, reading the tactics and movements of Revan and responding to whatever came across his guard. Revan noticed the change. It was slight, no doubt, but still enough to be noticeable. The contest took them backward and forward through the trees and across narrow streams of the great Alderaan landscape. It got to the point Revan noticed almost zero output in his opponent. At last, he thought, I have him. Thinking the moon was done, he wailed at his foe, mixing sequences from forms 4 and 7, looking to completely and thoroughly best his opponent. As if that weren't enough, the prodigal knight also kept Plagueis off balance, applying his force powers, usually in the form of a telekinetic strike, and torrents of force lightning. Yet Plagueis simply batted it all away. No crack in his defense had formed, nor would it, he thought to himself. The mid-fight ends up a tie, and would take up the majority of the contest. Revan would still be in charge leading the dance, but he was no longer finding any room in Plagueis' guard. That said, Plagueis would strictly be on the defensive, looking for patterns and waiting for the first potential mistake Revan may make. And because of this, Revan wouldn't be in any serious danger, resulting in a status quo scenario. Revan's barrage began to intensify. If he gave himself over to the Force more, he was sure he would end up the victor. His strikes seemed to be becoming more powerful, and used every angle possible, switching between brutal hacks before moving into quick spinning attacks. Plagueis started to understand now. The sequences of Form 4 and 7 became ever more clear to the Sith. Unleashing a grin, Plagueis waited until the exact moment. A slight opening presented itself. It was minuscule. Lesser beings would have missed it. But Plagueis wasn't your ordinary combatant. He was a Sith Lord. Reaching out, he unleashed a powerful force push that sent Revan back. Revan regained his composure mid-flight, catching himself, planting his lightsaber in the ground to slow his momentum. Surprised, Revan responded with Force Lightning, a stronger torrent than he had at any point in the fight so far. Plagueis simply caught it with his red blade, redirecting the bolts to one of the many nearby trees, causing it to ignite in a vigorous cloud of flames. Before the tree could ignite, Revan was already back to his feet. He began to worry. His attacks hadn't done anything yet, and now the tide was seemingly turning. He lunged once more at Plagueis and unleashed the full fury of his attacks. Trying to sucker him in like he had before, Revan threw a feint, but this time, he was the one who was lured. Plagueis anticipated the attack, unleashing a quick strike before outmaneuvering Revan. Before Revan could react, he felt a sharp pain across his back. He dropped his lightsaber in pain and fell to his knees. Extending his hand forward, Plagueis reached out into the Force and lifted the fallen body before him. Smiling, he threw Revan around the forest, smashing his body through trees and bouncing him off rocks as if it were a game of pinball. To the Moon's surprise, Revan tried to rise. This feeble attempt was met with torrents of Plagueis' Force lightning. He unleashed the full power of the dark side on him, a feeling Revan was familiar with, but still no less painful. Revan knew his fate and began to prepare himself to become one with the Force. Sensing that his opponent had conceded defeat, Plagueis stopped his attack and began to laugh. "Oh,
I'm not going to kill you,"
Plagueis said in an ominous tone, the smile on his face seemingly growing larger and larger.
"I have other uses for you."
To me, this contest comes down to their skill with the lightsaber, as both beings have a similar power in the Force. Revan would dictate the action. He is all about pressing his opponent, using his brilliant tactical mind to determine their weaknesses. This plays straight into Plagueis' hand. His style is all about the counterattack, responding to whatever strike may come his way. While this gets him into trouble with passive fighters, Revan is nothing like that. Plagueis is also no dummy, and while it may take a while, I do feel he is capable of learning the patterns and sequences of Revan and ultimately capitalizing on them. I could also see this happening in the form of a Force push. If Bastila Shan is able to land a blow against him, I think it's safe to say someone as methodical and powerful as Plagueis can as well. On top of this, Revan just isn't on the same level with the blade as Plagueis in my eyes. He's good, but his brilliant mind makes up for some of his shortcomings, and against the Moon, this becomes obvious the longer the fight drags on. When this has failed Revan in the past, he has been able to lean on his Force powers. Unfortunately for him, Plagueis is in the same tier as him in this regard, and will not help him in this contest. Ultimately, Revan's approach, Plagueis' superior skill with the blade, and their equal power in the Force grant Plagueis the win. I declare, Darth Plagueis the Wise, the master of life and death, the victor. Well, this one should be interesting in the comments, no doubt. Revan is a very difficult and contentious combatant to analyze. This is because he is primarily a video game character that you have complete and utter control over. For example, when I play KOTOR, I may think Revan is a Force god, adding all my skill points to unlock and enhance my Force powers. To you, however, you may think Revan is a master swordsman, and spend all your points upgrading your strength and unlocking new fury, power, and critical attack skills. For this analysis, I leaned into more what Drew Karpyshyn, the senior writer of KOTOR and Revan novel author, had to say. I feel this is a pretty damn good source, and while I disagree with a lot of what he did with the Exile, I will not argue his knowledge when it comes to Revan. Either way, I think my analysis of him came out great, and it's probably the one I'm most proud of to this point. Plagueis is also a tough combatant to analyze. Half the fanbase believes he can't fight with a lightsaber, and the other think he's a god that few could ever defeat. I kind of stand in the middle ground, and think I did the character justice. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this latest Versus video. I hope it was worth the wait, and I hope you liked the more detailed final verdict. If that was something you all liked, I'll be sure to go about writing my verdicts in this manner from here on out. Like I said, I hope it was worth the wait, and until next time, may the Force be with you all.